They had rehearsed the introductions 3 times that morning, and still Diana Otway did not know what to do with the third daughter of the house standing in the hallway with ink drying on her fingers. Through the open window of the estate office, the Duke of Selwood heard it before his boots ever touched the gravel, heard Diana's voice pitched low and pleasant, telling someone unseen to keep to the linen room until the trunks were carried in, telling her that this was not a day for her to be underfoot. He had not yet been introduced to anyone at all, but already before the carriage door had swung open, he understood that there were 2 sisters to be shown to him, and a third to be hidden, and it was the third who now stepped out into the white August light, sleeves rolled, directing 4 footmen with the trunks, as though she had done it every day of her life, which she had. Margaret Otway did not yet know that the tall, still-faced man watching her from the carriage step would, before the year turned, call her by a name no one living had ever used for her. Had she known it that morning, she would have wiped her hands on her apron all the same, and let him see the ink regardless. "Your Grace." Diana came forward with both arms lifted like a woman unveiling a painting, and in a sense she was. "My daughters, Rosalind and Camilla." Rosa dropped a curtsy so practised it might have been set to music. Camilla's was a half-second behind hers, as it always was. Julian Vaughan, Duke of Selwood, inclined his head to each in turn, and said the correct things, and meant almost none of them, because his eyes kept drifting past the 2 arranged silks to the woman still directing the last of the trunks toward the door. "And that," Diana said, following his gaze with the faintest crease between her brows, "is my late husband's daughter. Margaret keeps the house running. We could not do without her." It was, Julian would think later, the only wholly honest sentence Diana Otway spoke to him all that summer. Miss Otway. He said it directly to her, over Diana's shoulder, before anyone could steer him elsewhere. Meg turned, ink still on 2 fingers, and did not attempt to hide them. "Your Grace, you have the ledgers of this house well in hand, I think. It was not a question quite, someone must," she said, "and it is not always the person whose task it is." Diana's laugh arrived a half-second too quickly to be real. "Margaret has a dry humour, sir. You must forgive her. 6 weeks is a great deal to accomplish, and I am sure you would rather discuss pleasanter things than accounts." 6 weeks, Julian repeated. "My mother keeps to the old customs," Diana said smoothly, ushering him toward the drawing-room, one hand already finding Rosa's shoulder, then Camilla's, arranging them like flowers in a vase. "She will not see a settlement signed after the anniversary of the late Duke's death, or the whole matter waits a further year in mourning. Michaelmas, then, Your Grace, if we are to spare everyone the waiting." She said it lightly, as though it were a small inconvenience of etiquette and nothing more, and Julian let it pass without comment, because he had not yet learned that Diana Otway said her truest sentences in the lightest voice she owned. Meg had already gone back to the trunks. She did not look at him again, though she felt him watching, the way one feels weather changing before it arrives. That night, after the candles in the good rooms had been carried up, and the 2 beautiful sisters had been sent to bed, with their hair still pinned from the day's effort, Diana found Meg in the little office off the kitchen passage, a ledger open under one lamp. "You spoke to him." Diana did not raise her voice. She never needed to. "He spoke to me first. See that it does not happen twice." Diana's rings caught the lamplight as she smoothed her already smooth skirts, a small unnecessary motion she made when she wanted her hands to look occupied with something other than anger. Rosalind and Camilla have 6 weeks to become a duchess. You have 6 weeks to be furniture. I should think you know which of those tasks you have had more practice at. Meg did not answer. She capped the ink, squared the ledger's corners with 2 fingers, and said nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer, and Diana, who prided herself on reading rooms the way other women read novels, mistook the stillness for surrender. She was not entirely wrong to. Meg had learned young that the quickest way to keep a roof over 3 girls' heads was to be the one nobody troubled to notice, and for 6 years it had served her well enough. But something in the way the Duke had said someone must, as if he had already begun totting a column that did not balance, stayed with her longer than she would have liked. Long after the house had gone dark, and the last carriage wheel had faded from the drive, out past the hedgerow where a single wren, disturbed by nothing at all, sang its ordinary 3 notes into the ordinary dark, and went on singing them, unheard by anyone who mattered yet. He came back 4 days later, and told no one it was for the ledgers. Though it was, he arrived at an hour too early for calling, and too late for excuses, and Diana, caught between her morning correspondence and her daughter's dressmaker, could only smile and say that Margaret would show him the estate office, since Margaret knew where everything was kept, and disappear before the sentence had quite finished landing. Meg set down her pen when he came in. She did not stand quite, and did not fully sit either, a compromise between deference and the plain fact that she had a column half added. "You will find the tenant rents in the left book," she said, "and my father's plantings in the right, though the right book has not been touched since he died, because no one since has cared to plant anything he did not already plant. And the left book is mine. I keep it because Lady Otway does not care to, and because someone must, as I believe I told you. You did. He did not sit either, though there was a chair. I should like to see both, if you will allow it, Miss Otway. Not out of idle curiosity. A man does not marry into an estate blind, whatever the settlement says of it. A man does not marry an estate at all, Your Grace. He marries a person. The estate merely comes along after, like weather. It surprised a sound out of him that was not quite a laugh, not yet, but stood close to the door of one. You have opinions on matrimony. I have opinions on ledgers. Matrimony I leave to those with leisure to consider it." She turned the left book toward him, and for the better part of an hour they bent over rents and repairs, and a disputed boundary hedge with the Aldous farm, and he asked good questions, the kind that meant he had actually read what she showed him, rather than merely nodding at it, and she answered them plainly, without the small flatteries she had watched Rosa and Camilla practice in the glass, since they were girls. It was, she would think afterward, the first conversation she had had with a man of his rank that had not required her to make herself smaller in the middle of it. Old Nan Bridle, who had nursed all 3 girls and buried both their mothers in her own way, found Meg in the still-room that evening grinding dried lavender with more force than the lavender required. "He's not what I expected of a duke," Nan said, without preamble, because preambles were for people with time to waste, and Nan had raised 3 motherless girls and had none to spare. "What did you expect? Powder and a weak chin. Instead, we've got a great grave ox of a man who looks at you the way your father used to look at a bad harvest, like he means to fix it, not weep over it." She took the pestle from Meg's hand before it cracked the bowl. "Your mother used to say the plain bird sings the same note, if anyone troubles to listen. I never thought I'd see the day a duke troubled. He is here for Rosa. Or Camilla. Lady Otway has arranged it very thoroughly. Lady Otway arranges everything thoroughly. It's what she does instead of loving anybody." Meg let that sit, because there was truth enough in it that arguing would have been its own kind of lie. Her father, Sir Edmund, had married Diana 4 years after her own mother Alice died. When Meg was 10 and desperate for anyone, to sit with her in the evenings, Diana had sat with her exactly twice, and both times had talked only of herself. When Rosa was born, and then Camilla 2 years after, it was Meg, not yet 15, who had walked the floors with them at night, while Diana recovered her figure and her spirits in equal and unhurried measure. When Sir Edmund died, 6 years past now, of a fever that took him in 9 days, Diana had wept beautifully at the funeral, and taken up the guardianship of the estate and both girls, with a competence that surprised everyone who did not know her well. And Meg, who knew her very well indeed, had simply gone on doing what she had always done. Because the girls still needed feeding, and the accounts still needed keeping, and grief, she had found, was a luxury item, like the silk Diana wore, that some households could not afford. He asked to see the right-hand book, Meg said now, setting the pestle down properly. My father's book. No one has asked after that in 6 years, and what did you tell him? That no one has planted anything since. Nan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more the ghost of the smile Nan allowed herself before witnesses. Careful, lamb. A man who asks about roots is a man thinking of staying somewhere. He is thinking of my sisters. He is thinking of you. I've buried 2 mistresses of this house, and outlived a third's ambitions, and I know the look of a man doing sums he doesn't yet know he's doing. Meg said nothing to that, because there was nothing safe to say, and outside the still-room window the last light was going long and gold across the drying lavender, and somewhere past the hedge the wren was singing again. 3 notes, plain and unhurried, exactly as it had the night the carriage came, exactly as it would go on doing whether or not anyone in that house ever learned to listen. Diana chose the rose garden for the conversation, because the rose garden had no walls to carry a raised voice, and no servants near enough to overhear one, and because she had never yet needed to raise her voice to make herself understood. You are becoming a topic, Margaret. I have not sought to be. No. That has always been your particular talent, becoming necessary without ever becoming visible. It has suited us both a long while. Diana turned a rose stem between 2 fingers, not quite touching the thorns. I should hate to see it stop suiting us now, 6 weeks from a settlement that will keep your sisters in silk for the rest of their lives. You need not threaten me to keep me quiet, my lady. I have never been loud. Then be quieter still. A man like the Duke of Selwood does not choose the housekeeper. He chooses the drawing-room. If you forget that, even once, in front of him or his mother, or anyone who matters, you will find there is very little room left in this house for a woman with no fortune, and no claim on it. Meg set the rose Diana had been turning back into its bed of soil, gently, the way she set every disordered thing right when she found it. I have never wanted your fortune, my lady, only my sister's happiness. Then want it quietly, from the corridor, where you have always wanted things. Diana left her among the roses, and Meg did not move for a long moment, because moving would have meant deciding what to feel first, and there were too many candidates. Below stairs, the news of the Duke's 6-week courtship had already become the finest entertainment the servants' hall had enjoyed in a decade. The scullery maid kept a wagering book in the flour bin, a penny a guess, odds shifting daily between Rosa's dimples and Camilla's dowry, and nobody troubled to enter a guess for Meg at all, which she found privately more restful than insulting. Miss Honora Steed of the neighbouring parish called twice that week under the transparent pretence of visiting Rosa, and left both times having learned nothing except that the Duke rode out early, and rode out often, and that he had twice now been seen crossing the yard toward the estate office rather than the drawing-room, a fact she filed away with the particular attention of a young woman who had, until a month ago, considered the Duke of Selwood very nearly her own. It was on one of those ordinary mornings, with the account books spread before her, and nothing on her mind but the tenant rolls, that Meg found the entry that would not lie flat, no matter which way she turned it, a payment, recorded in her father's book, in a hand that was not her father's, dated 11 months after Sir Edmund had been laid in the churchyard. A debt to a Mr. Josiah Crail, solicitor, in an amount that made her set the pen down and read it again. Her father had never owed Josiah Crail a shilling in his life. She would have known. She had kept every figure that passed through this house since she was 17 years old, and her father's hand, before he died, had been as familiar to her as her own, a firm downward stroke on his sevens, ink pressed hard enough to show through the page, a man who wrote the way he lived, without apology. This hand was careful where his had been firm, and it apologised for nothing, and it was wrong. She copied the entry into the back of her own private book before she closed the ledger, and told no one, not even Nan, because a suspicion spoken aloud too early was a suspicion that could be smoothed away before it had time to prove itself, and Meg Otway had learned patience the way other women learned dancing, early, thoroughly, and at some cost. By the third week of his visits, Julian Vaughan had stopped pretending the ledgers required quite so much of his attention, and Meg had stopped pretending she believed the pretence. He came in the mornings now, before Diana was dressed to receive him, and more often than not it was because a tenant's roof had failed in the night, or a lambing had gone wrong 2 farms over, or the boundary hedge with the Aldous land had produced yet another grievance requiring a level head and a steady hand, and Meg, riding out to see to it in a coat too plain for a lady of the house and gloves stained past saving, had simply found him beside her more mornings than not. "You do not ride like a woman who was taught to," he said once, watching her manage a gait one-handed without breaking stride. "I was taught to manage, your grace. Nobody troubled overmuch with elegance. It is not inelegant." He said it plainly, the way he said most things, and she found she had no ready answer for plain honesty, having spent years arming herself against every other kind. It was on the 4th such morning, over a lambing gone sideways, and a farmer's wife weeping with relief when the second lamb finally came breathing, that he told her about Cordelia, not all of it, not yet, but enough. "I was engaged once, some years past." Her family let it be known rather too soon that certain Vaughan debts had come briefly into question, before they were settled as they always were going to be settled. She broke it within the week, and married a viscount with better arithmetic. "I am sorry. Don't be. It taught me something useful. I have never since trusted an offer that arrived wrapped in a ledger." Meg looked at him for a long moment, because there was an irony sitting in that sentence sharp enough to cut her, and she could not yet tell him why. "There is a thing I cannot yet lay before you," she said finally, choosing the words the way she chose figures, for their exactness rather than their comfort. "Then I will wait until you can." He said it without demanding more, which undid her rather more than demanding would have. It was the farmer's wife, wiping her eyes and laughing at her own tears in the same breath, who said something foolish about the lamb's crooked ear, and Julian, watching the ridiculous creature stagger upright on legs too long for it, laughed, really laughed, from some place low and startled out of long disuse, a sound Meg had not heard from him in 3 weeks of mornings. The farmer's wife would tell it in the village for a year afterward, that she was the one who'd made a duke laugh in her own sheep pen, and never know that Meg carried the sound home with her folded away like a pressed flower, turning it over some nights the way she turned over the strange entry in her father's book, for entirely different reasons. Terms shifted between them without either one announcing it. Your Grace became, once or twice, simply Sir, and Miss Otway, on the day the second lamb was named after her for reasons nobody could quite explain, became, just once, Margaret said quietly, as though testing whether the name would hold his weight. It held. Meg did not tell him about the entry in the ledger. Not yet. She told herself it was because she had no proof. Only a hand that did not match a dead man's hand, and a solicitor's name that meant nothing to her yet. She did not tell herself, because it was not yet true enough to need telling, that she had begun, against every rule she had made for her own safety, to want something from this arrangement beyond her sister's silk gowns, and a roof that would hold through winter. Old Aldous Penny had been her father's clerk for 11 years before Diana dismissed him within a month of the funeral, with a small pension and a smaller word of thanks, and he had lived since in a cottage 2 miles past the church, keeping bees and, Meg suspected, keeping something else besides. She began visiting him after dark, twice, then 3 times, walking the field path with a shawl over her hair, because a solicitor's name on a debt her father never owed was not a thing to be asked about in daylight, in a house with Diana's ears in every doorway. Crail, Penny said the second time, turning his teacup without drinking from it, handled certain private matters for your father before he died, and handled a great deal more for Lady Otway after. What matters? I kept my own accounts alongside the house's, Miss Meg, for 11 years, out of habit more than suspicion. I did not think, until you came asking, to compare the two. And now that you have? Penny did not answer directly, which was itself an answer, and told her only to be careful who saw her walking his field path after dark. Because careful was the one thing he still had the strength to be afraid for on her behalf. She was not careful enough. Camilla, sleepless and restless 3 nights later, saw her sister slip out past the orchard gate near midnight, and, being 18 and unable to keep a secret past breakfast, mentioned it to her mother over the marmalade the next morning, as though it were the smallest thing in the world. It was not the smallest thing in the world to Diana. By that afternoon, dressed in the particular shade of concern she wore best, she had found occasion to mention to the Duke, quite by accident, quite reluctantly, that dear Margaret had been seen more than once meeting a man alone after dark, and that she, Diana, hated to think ill of anyone. Truly she did. But a woman without fortune sometimes felt she had to secure her future, by whatever means presented themselves, and one could hardly blame her, though one did wish she had chosen a more honest means than deceiving a duke who had shown her nothing but kindness. She said it gently. She always said the cruellest things gently. Julian did not come to the estate office the next morning, nor the one after. When he did come, 3 days later, he did not sit, and he did not ask about the ledgers. You have been meeting a man at night. It was not a question. I have. I cannot yet tell you why. You told me once there was a thing you could not yet lay before me. I begin to wonder how large that thing has grown, and how many people share it before I do. Not as many as you fear, and not for reasons you fear either. I was engaged to a woman who let it be known she wanted my name, and nothing that came attached to it. I told myself I would know the second time, if a second time ever came. I find I am no longer certain I would. He left without another word, and Meg stood alone in the office with her father's ledger open before her and the old, familiar ache of being misjudged settling into her chest like a stone dropped into still water, spreading its rings out long after the stone itself had gone still. Diana came to her that evening with an offer dressed so carefully as kindness that it took Meg a full minute to recognise the shape of it as a bribe. "You have had a difficult 6 years, Margaret, and no one has thanked you for them properly. I have written to my cousin in Yorkshire. She would be glad of a companion of your sense and steadiness, and I have arranged a small annuity, enough to keep you comfortably if you were to go to her before Michaelmas. You wish me gone before the settlement is signed. I wish you settled, Margaret, which is more than most women in your position are ever offered. Whatever foolish tangle you have got yourself into with that clerk, no one need ever know of it, if you are simply elsewhere when the question might be asked. And if I stay, then I cannot promise what the Duke will be told, or when, or how much of it will be true by the time it reaches him." Meg looked at the paper Diana held out, a generous sum. Generous enough to buy a small independence she had never in her life been offered before, and for one long moment she let herself imagine taking it. A cottage of her own, no ledgers, but her own small ones, no sisters to raise who were not, in the end, entirely grateful to have been raised. "No," she said, "I will not go. You would rather stay and be ruined. I would rather stay and be honest, my lady, whatever it costs me. I raised Rosa and Camilla with my own hands when you were resting your spirits, and I will not leave them to be sold to a man on false papers while I take your money to look away." Something in Diana's face went very still, the particular stillness of a woman recalculating an opponent she had gravely underestimated. "You will regret that answer, Margaret, I promise you that much." She did not regret it that night, nor the next, though both were harder nights than she had known in years. And she lay awake turning her father's true hand and Crail's false one over in her mind like two coins that would not match, no matter how she weighed them, and out past the orchard the wren, which knew nothing of ledgers or dukes or the price of honesty, sang on into the dark exactly as it always had, needing no audience at all to make the song worth singing. The blow, when it came quickly. 2 days after her refusal, Diana informed the household that dear Margaret's constitution required rest, and that she would be sent to a cousin near the coast for her health, until after Michaelmas no discussion offered, no appeal permitted. A footman already engaged to see her onto the coach the following dawn. Meg understood it for precisely what it was, not care, but removal, timed to empty the house of the one person who might stand up in the middle of the settlement signing and say the word forgery aloud. That same night, word came from Aldous Penny's cottage, carried by a boy, who ran the field path barefoot because his boots made too much noise. Mr. Penny had been visited that afternoon by a man he did not know, asking careful questions about old accounts and older habits, and Penny, frightened past sense, had packed a small parcel of papers and sent the boy running before he lost his nerve entirely. The boy reached the kitchen door white-faced and out of breath, and Nan Bridle, who had been listening at that door for exactly this kind of trouble for 40 years, had him inside before Diana's own maid crossed the yard. He said to give it to Miss Meg and no one else. The boy gasped. And he said, tell her the ledger is the proof, and the letter is the hand that wrote it, and God keep her safe till she can show them both together. But Meg, by the time Nan reached her with the parcel held against her chest, like something that might yet catch fire, was already behind a locked door on Diana's order. her trunk half packed by hands not her own, a coach wheel already promised for first light. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed with the parcel unopened in her lap. 6 weeks of watching and waiting narrowed now to a single night, and asked herself the only question that mattered, and had no easy answer, whether Nan Bridle's courage and an old clerk's frightened parcel would be enough, in the few hours left to her, to reach a duke who no longer believed a word she said. Nan Bridle had never in her life waited for anyone's permission to do what plainly wanted doing, and she did not begin that night. She had the boy fetch the spare key from the linen room, the one Diana did not know Nan had copied years before against exactly this kind of emergency, and by the time the house had properly gone to sleep, Meg stood in the kitchen passage with the parcel in her hands and Nan's shawl over her shoulders against the night air. "You'll not go to Yorkshire," Nan said, as though there had ever been any question. "No," Meg said, "not until this is finished." Inside the parcel, by candlelight, she found what Aldous Penny had kept safe for 6 years, out of nothing but an old clerk's stubborn habit of never throwing away a figure that did not add, his own private accounts, kept faithfully alongside her father's, showing every debt Sir Edmund had actually owed, and every one he had actually paid, none of them to Josiah Crail, and beneath the account book, wrapped in oilcloth, a letter in a hand Meg had never seen before that night, but recognised within 3 lines as belonging to Diana, instructing Crowley, in terms too plain to misread, to enter a debt against the estate that had never existed, timed to fall due at Michaelmas, so that whatever settlement the Duke of Selwood signed for one daughter or the other would first pass through Crail's careful hands and leave rather less behind it than anyone but Diana would ever know to look for. It was not, Meg realised, reading it a second time by candlelight, only a scheme to secure a rich marriage. It was a plan to bleed the estate dry the very week it changed hands, before an audit that Michaelmas itself would otherwise have forced. She had one more thing, and she went for it herself, from the small locked drawer where she kept what little her mother had left her, a silver locket, her mother Alice's, holding a portrait of Sir Edmund on one side, and behind it, folded so small it had taken Meg years even to know it was there, a receipt in her father's own unmistakable hand, dated, sealed, marked, paid in full, for the very sum Crail's false entry claimed still owing. "A column of figures does not flatter you," her father used to say, turning his ledger toward her when she was a girl too young to understand why it mattered, "and it does not lie to you either." She understood it now better than she ever had. Nan got word to the stable that a rider must go before dawn to Selwood, not to the great house, but to the Duke himself, with a message asking only that he attend the settlement signing that Diana had fixed for Michaelmas morning in the great hall, and that he bring, if he would be so good, the Dowager Duchess and whichever trustee the family kept for exactly this sort of occasion. Diana, informed the next morning that her cousin's household would not after all receive Margaret this week owing to a delayed coach, allowed herself to believe it an inconvenience rather than a warning, which was, in the small store of mercies that week afforded, the last mistake she would make before the one that mattered most. Crail, arriving at the Grange 2 days before Michaelmas to prepare the final papers, found himself twice questioned sharply by Diana over trifles that had never troubled her before, and left both meetings with his hands unsteady on his own satchel, the first hairline crack showing in a composure he had worn 11 years without once needing to mend it. Michaelmas morning came in clear and cool, after a night of storm, the kind of washed ringing light that makes a room look more honest than it usually is, and the great hall at Fenwick Grange had been arranged exactly as Diana wished it. The Dowager Duchess Eleanor Vaughan seated near the hearth in dove grey, Mr. Bramwell, the family trustee, at the table, with the settlement papers squared before. Him, Rosa and Camilla dressed for a triumph neither of them yet understood was not coming, and Josiah Crail standing a little apart with his satchel held before him like a shield. Julian stood near the window, having ridden through half the night to be there, and said nothing at all until the doors opened, and Meg walked in still in her travelling cloak. Nan Bridle 1 step behind her, Margaret. Diana's voice found its pleasant register even now. "You were not expected, I asked to be here," Meg said, "because what is about to be signed is built on a lie, and a lie should be undone in the light, at midday before every name here that matters, not whispered afterward where it cannot be answered." She crossed to the table and set down 3 things: Aldous Penny's private accounts, the letter in Diana's own hand, and her mother's silver locket, opened to show the folded receipt behind her father's portrait. My father owed Mr. Crail nothing. This is his hand, his seal, and the date the debt was paid, 11 months before the entry in the estate ledger claims it was ever made at all. A murmur went through the room like wind finding a gap in a wall. Mr. Bramwell took up the receipt and held it to the window light, turning it, comparing it, his trustee's face arranging itself into the particular stillness of a man who has just understood he is holding evidence rather than paper. Mr. Crail, Julian's voice, when it came, was very quiet, and the quietness carried further than shouting would have. Whose hand entered this debt in the estate ledger 11 months after Sir Edmund Otway was in his grave? Crail's fingers found the clasp of his satchel, and could not seem to master it. "Your Grace, I acted upon instruction." "Whose instruction, Mr. Crail?" "Look at the letter in front of you, and look at me, and answer the question once, plainly, as though it were the last figure you will ever be asked to account for." It broke him the way a dam breaks, not gradually but all at once. Lady Otway's, Your Grace. All of it. The debt, the dates, the entries. She told me what to write, and I wrote it, because she held my own debts in her hand these 6 years, and I had not the courage to refuse her. He drew the letter from his own satchel with shaking hands, the very letter Meg had already laid on the table, as though producing it himself might yet save some fragment of his name. "Read it," Meg said quietly, "so that no one here need take my word for what it says." Bramwell read it aloud, Diana's own sentences falling into the silent hall one by one, each one a nail driven cleanly home. And by the 3rd line Diana had stopped pretending composure was still available to her. "You do not know what it is," she said, "to no one and everyone, her rings twisting uselessly at her fingers, to come into a house as a second wife, welcomed for a season, and then quietly filed away the moment the first wife's daughter proved cleverer than anyone wanted a plain girl to be. I had nothing that was mine, not the house, not the name, not even my own daughter's futures, once Edmund's will made certain they would inherit, and I would not. I did what I did because I was afraid, and because fear, left alone long enough, learns to call itself arithmetic. It was, everyone in that room understood, the truest thing Diana Otway had said since the morning the carriage first came up the drive, and it did not excuse a single figure she had forged, and it explained rather more of them than anyone had expected to feel sorry for. Julian looked at her a long moment. "You will have an allowance," he said finally, "and a cottage at the edge of the estate, far enough that Rosa and Camilla may visit you or not as they choose, and there will be no magistrate, no scandal carried beyond this room." Not for your sake, Lady Otway. For theirs, so that your daughters need never explain their mother's name in a courtroom. Diana did not thank him. She only nodded, once, and something in the nod looked, for the first time in 6 years, almost like relief. The storm that broke the night before had cleared the heat from the air entirely, and by the time the hall emptied of trustees and solicitors, and the particular exhaustion that follows a reckoning, only Julian and Meg remained by the cold hearth, the locket still open on the table between them. "You never told me," he said. "Not once, in all these weeks, though you carried it the whole time. I had no proof for a long while, only a hand that did not match a dead man's hand. And when I had proof enough, you had stopped believing anything I told you. I know it." He said it plainly, the way he said most things, no ornament to soften it. "I was engaged once to a woman who wanted my name and nothing that came attached to honestly earning it, and I told myself I would never again mistake fear for good judgment. I mistook it anyway. I am sorry for it, Margaret, more than I have words arranged to say properly. You came, in the end. That is not nothing. I did not come for the settlement, and I did not come for either of your sisters, whatever this house arranged 6 weeks ago, believing otherwise. I came because a woman who keeps a column of figures honest, even when honesty costs her everything she has, is rarer in my experience than any dukedom, and I find I no longer wish to live without her nearby. That is not quite a question, Your Grace. No, I find I am done asking questions with a settlement attached to them. Marry me because you wish it, Margaret. It is the only reason I will take, and the only one I would trust." Meg looked at the locket, at her father's paid receipt still catching the window light, and thought of every ledger she had balanced alone in a cold office for 6 years, so that no one else would have to notice the house was failing, and found, for possibly the first time in her adult life, that she wanted something entirely for herself and no one else's account. "Then yes," she said, "because I wish it." The wedding, when it came 3 weeks later, was small and quiet exactly as the settlement signing had been large and terrible, held in the little church at Fenwick, with Rosa and Camilla weeping happily in the front pew, and Nan Bridle weeping rather less happily in the back, insisting between sobs that she had known it since the 2nd week, that she had said so plainly, and that no one ever listened to an old woman who had buried 2 mistresses of the house and raised a 3rd with her own 2 hands. Rosa married, the following spring, a steady young gentleman from the next county, who had loved her patiently through the whole scandal and asked for nothing but her company afterward. Camilla, in time, found a match of her own choosing rather than one arranged for her, which Meg counted as the truest gift her sisters ever received from the whole ordeal. Josiah Crowley never practised law again, but neither did anyone speak his name in scorn beyond that one hard morning. He kept bees, in the end not far from Aldous Penny, who was restored to a respectable position as steward of the Selwood accounts, and never again had cause to send a frightened boy running barefoot down a field path. Miss Honora Steed, who had once believed the Duke very nearly her own, called on Meg that winter to apologise plainly for repeating gossip she should have questioned, and was received warmly enough that she called again, and again, until she became, unexpectedly, a friend. She married, 2 years on, a widowed magistrate with 3 children who needed exactly her particular steadiness, and considered it, she said, a finer bargain than a dukedom would have been. Diana kept her cottage and her small garden at the edge of the estate, and though her daughters visited her dutifully rather than warmly, dutifully was in the end more than she had ever offered anyone else first. A year almost to the day after a carriage first came up the drive of Fenwick Grange, another carriage came up that same drive, and a woman stepped down from it with ink very faintly on 2 fingers, because some habits outlast even duchesses, and this time it was her name that was spoken first in the doorway. Her name the household turned to greet. While past the hedge, undisturbed by any of it, a plain brown wren sang its ordinary 3 notes into the ordinary autumn light, exactly as it always had, and only now, a year gone, did the whole house finally stop long enough to listen. If that story warmed you the way a hearth warms a room slowly, from the one chair nearest the fire outward, then stay a while longer with me, because I have the kettle on, and a chair kept empty just for whoever wandered in tonight looking for it. Tell me, in the comments, which line stayed with you longest, the wren, the ledger, or the marrying, because you wish it. I read every one, and I keep them the way Meg kept her father's figures, carefully, and for a long time. Stay by the fire with me a little longer. Subscribe if you'd like to keep your place here for the next one. The kettle will still be warm. Sleep well tonight, and be gentle with the ones who kept your lamp lit long before you ever thought to notice the light.